Wow, I really didn't expect the Resident Evil ranking video to get as much attention as it did. I want to thank every single one of you guys who went out and watched that. It really means the world to me. So of course I had to come back with some more ranking videos. There are plenty of games, characters, lists, sets, anything that you can think of that we can rank, and I will be ranking them. Today we are dealing with one of my favorite franchises ever, Final Fantasy. But before we jump into that, my name is Tradgik, and for those of you who don't know me, I'm a speedrunner, streamer, and game designer here on YouTube. I've recently made my return to the platform, and I just want to say once again, thank you so much for your guys' positive response. And one last thing before we jump into this, please remember that this is all my opinions, just the opinion of some dumb, lonely guy on YouTube, so let me know what your guys' opinion is down in the comment section below, and let's just jump into this. Alright, so let's take a look at one of my favorite series of all time, Final Fantasy. Now already I've gone through the list here and I've separated the ones I haven't played, which is World of Final Fantasy, Lightning Returns, and Final Fantasy 13-2. Just never got a chance to touch them. I never finished 13. That still gives us a bunch of mainline entries to go through. And one of the things I wanted to mention really quick is we got the North American box art for Final Fantasy 2 and 3, which is 4 and 6, of course, but in the case of this, they will be representing Final Fantasy 2 and Final Fantasy 3. In my case, Final Fantasy 3 on the DS, because that's the one I played. Alright, so let's take a look at the tiers that we have here. At the very top, we got God tier. This is reserved for the best of the best, my favorite Final Fantasies, the games that I think define Final Fantasy. Then, right below that, we got those almost perfect titles, the ones that are just so good, but they're missing something small, something specific. I won't always know what that is, but they're just missing something that defines what Final Fantasy is to me. Then you got Great, which are still fun games to play in their own right. Maybe they're not my go-to when I think of Final Fantasy, but they are still good games. Mid is like, take it or leave it. There's probably no reason to really play this, but I mean, whatever. If you got nothing else to do. And then Bad is just run. Run, get as far away from this as possible. Alright. So with all that said, who's ready to piss some people off? First up, Final Fantasy on the NES. Where will this go? Okay, so I'm trying to look at this objectively as games of today, and I think overall, this ends up in the great category, mainly for its legacy, okay, for everything that it started, the entire series as a whole, and it being one of the best RPGs on the system at the time. But today, I mean, no offense to the original Final Fantasy, but it's very generic, very boring in my opinion, and once you start getting into that white bread territory of being exactly what you expect from a fantasy RPG, it just doesn't really hold me anymore. But you can't ignore what it did for really gaming as a whole, so because of that, it's going to get ranked as great. Next up, Final Fantasy 2. I am almost enticed to put this in bad, just for a lot of its game mechanics. But overall, I mean, it's still a decently playable game. I wouldn't say it's a great Final Fantasy, not even as good as the original. I had some interesting ideas, but overall, I think it's a pretty mid game, just bland. Final Fantasy 3 on the DS. I did actually really enjoy this. I never played the original Final Fantasy 3, of course, but the DS version was quite charming and had some unique ideas and some unique ways to approach classes and stuff like that. I don't think it sits in this almost perfect tier or god tier of Final Fantasy, but it is definitely a great game. Final Fantasy Mystic Quest. Are you new to gaming? Are you new to RPGs? Well, this is the game for you. But unfortunately, it's not for anyone else, and it's overall just a pretty bad game. It takes Final Fantasy and simplifies every single aspect of it. It is baby's first RPG, but even then, baby can do better. Final Fantasy IV. Now this, to me, is when the pixelated Final Fantasy started to get really good. I don't consider it god tier. You'll notice that of a lot of the Final Fantasies that kind of follow traditional fantasy settings, they just don't really appeal to me all that much, or even really bring the name Final Fantasy to mind when I think of it, because I feel like Final Fantasy really hit its stride around 6, 7, that kind of thing, moving into the more futuristic fantasy titles. So 4, while it has a great cast, great story, great everything, I'm honestly gonna place it right here, because I think like it's a really good game, but it's not god tier for me. Final Fantasy V, I've heard people say really good things about this game. I only played it very briefly, but my experience with it kind of sets it right in this mid section of like, it's a fine game, but it doesn't really stand the test of time in that same memorable zone as a lot of future Final Fantasies would. And I'm sure somebody out there has Final Fantasy V as their favorite, but just not me. Final Fantasy VI. Oh my god, this one is going to cause people to run to the effing hills. Where is Final Fantasy VI? Is it bad? Is it mid? Is it God tier? I know a lot of people would say it's God tier. For me, though, I think Final Fantasy VI is almost perfect. It is a very, very good Final Fantasy game, a very good game just in general. Fantastic villain, great character arcs, but I don't know, there was something as I was kind of playing through it, maybe just those like pixelated, like old school SNES games, because I didn't really grow up with Final Fantasy in that era. Maybe it's just not for me. I do appreciate Final Fantasy VI a lot. I do like its characters and its setting and its plot. But there's just something that doesn't really scream like, this is Final Fantasy in its definitive state for me. And I know that a lot of this list will probably be pretty controversial, but this is honestly how I feel about the series. And I would love for you guys to let me know how you feel about the series down in the comments below, so make sure to do that. Next up, I mean, say what you will, this is one of my favorite games of all time. Matter of fact, for a long time, it was my favorite game of all time. And it's what got me into Final Fantasy, and I love its characters, I love its setting, its style, its world, every single thing about this game. I wouldn't really say the same thing about its entire compilation, but Final Fantasy VII, just as is like in my top 3 favorite games of all time. It's what I think of when I think of Final Fantasy. I highly, highly recommend you play Final Fantasy VII. Next up is Final Fantasy VIII. If I could just be like 100% non-biased and just be like, what's my opinion of this game? Boom, God tier. I love it. But I understand where a lot of its flaws are. And I really think it sits in this almost perfect category where it's got some really good characters, especially designs. I love the way the world is in Final Fantasy VIII. I think Final Fantasy VIII and Final Fantasy VII kind of share a lot of similarities in its design. But of course, Final Fantasy VII, I prefer that magic system over 8. There are some cool ideas here, some cool characters, and a kind of convoluted story, but overall one that I still appreciate. And I think 8 for me kind of sits in this category of like, it's almost perfect. It's almost there. But it's a fantastic game overall, and you should play it if you haven't. Final Fantasy IX, another one where people will probably question every single thing that I've ever stood for. I honestly am not a huge fan of 9. Having said that, I don't think it's a mid or bad game. It's a great game. To say it's almost perfect, I mean, it's a very complicated crossroad, because I look at 9 and I see all the things that it does right. It does remind me of that, incredible PS1 era of Final Fantasy, but I'm not a big fan of the character design. Going back to that more traditional fantasy setting is not really something that I enjoyed. I like more of like 8 and 7's kind of appeal. So I think I'm going to give it to almost perfect, because I think the gameplay is there. I think the atmosphere is there. I think that the fans that really, really love this game love it for a very good reason. But for me, it just sits in this category of it's almost perfect, but it just doesn't break that top tier. But you know what comes next? A game that does. Final Fantasy X. I adore Final Fantasy X. It has its flaws, of course. The voice acting gets ridiculed and a lot of other things. But Final Fantasy X for me shares a lot of fantastic memories of actually renting a PS2, the entire console, along with Final Fantasy X when I was a kid, and being really confused because at the time Final Fantasy VII was the only game I had played in the series. And I was so confused as to why this wasn't Cloud and Tifa, and I was like, isn't that how numbered sequels work? Aren't you supposed to have the same characters? And I was so confused, but I ended up playing it and loving it, and yeah, it's always been like a very, very cherished game for me. And I love its turn-based battles, the way that the order kind of pops up on the side, and the story was really good. I love the twist at the end. Fantastic game. Highly recommend you play Final Fantasy X. Next up, Final Fantasy X-2. Now, I'm sure a lot of people think I should just slap it here in bad or mid and just kind of walk away. But I'm actually going to put it up here as a great game. I like Final Fantasy X-2. It is not what I want from my Final Fantasies, which is why it doesn't score higher. And it's not exactly a super investing story. How do I want to say it? Like, it's not a story you get invested in, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. But it does have some fun moments, some crazy characters, some memorable like costume changes, and some weird like job, like the way that they handled the jobs was interesting. Is what I want to say. Like it was unique. But yeah, I don't know. I like Final Fantasy X too. It's clearly not one of the best Final Fantasies ever, but it's an okay game. I actually quite enjoy it. Final Fantasy XI, I'm actually just going to slap it right here. I did play it for a while. I had already played 14 by the time I gave 11 a chance. It is a very hardcore game, and it's for a very specific type of person, especially a very specific type of MMO fan. But Final Fantasy XI is a good game. It's a very good game, but I'm not sure it's the MMO for me. But yeah, really cool. Final Fantasy XII. Oh, okay, I'm going to put it right here in the great category, and I'm going to say this. I think it's got interesting ideas, and it was really cool that it tried to do something different with the battle system, kind of combining it with like the MMO style, and some of its secrets are really interesting, and some of its like side plots, and I don't know, there's a lot of details in Final Fantasy XII I like. I'm not a huge fan of the art style or character design, even though I think it's well made. It's just not my preferred style. And overall, the story didn't really do it for me. It's kind of a bit too political, a bit too, like, I don't know, just not really my kind of thing. So I think because of that, it sits right here in the great category. Final Fantasy 13, I don't really know what to say about this. Part of me wants to say I think it's just mid. It has some cool character designs, but the voice acting is just all over the place. The characters aren't really all that interesting or even really likable, in my opinion. The world was kind of cool, but the terminology was just crazy and all over the place. And I don't know. Final Fantasy 13 just didn't do it for me in almost any way. It was very linear until you got like way further into the game. I could give like probably 100 more reasons, but Final Fantasy 13 just never clicked with me, despite loving the designs. I think the designs were really cool. Final Fantasy 14. Damn right. I played the hell out of Final Fantasy 14, all the way up to its not most recent expansion, but the one right before it. And I have plenty of good times with friends, years and years of memories. You know, Matrix Mercs for life, man. Matrix Mercs. If I ever do jump in again, I'm over on the Brynhilder server, so if anybody wants to play, you know, just hit me up. But yeah, I think Final Fantasy 14 is kind of like the perfect MMO for plenty of reasons, but I could make a whole video on that. Final Fantasy 15. Now, this is another one that gets a lot of mixed emotions. I'm going to be honest. I want to put it here. I want to. But the plot holes in the story, the way the DLCs kind of just tapered off and they never finished them all, there's just some strange inconsistencies. But I will say, this is a very, very high, almost perfect. I want it in God tier. I do. I really, really do. I love Final Fantasy 15. It has that same kind of style as 7 and 10 and 8. And for me, that's kind of like a big deal. Like, I love that kind of aesthetic, the kind of like modern fantasy. These games kind of really define Final Fantasy for me in like that design kind of way. But yeah, it's got too many flaws, too many strange game designs that I'm just like, I can't. Hey there guys, Future Tradgik here. I just realized at the end of making this video that they actually didn't include Final Fantasy 16 on this list, and I must have just completely forgot about it. So I figured I would step in right here to kind of just like add it in. Now I know this is not going to get a lot of positive reception from the community, but honestly I think Final Fantasy 16 sits in that range somewhere between mid and great game. I just think a lot of the events and the characters in this particular title are too forgettable. Even somebody like Clive himself just kind of feels like a generic Final Fantasy 14 character where you just hit randomize at the starting screen, or it's like the basic gladiator model. Overall, I just didn't find anybody super memorable or really attached to the story at all. I just thought it was okay. Sorry for that depressing interlude. Back to the video. And for the last one, we have the Final Fantasy VII Remake. Now, I'm going to include Rebirth in this, and theoretically, whatever the third part is. Who am I kidding, man? God tier. I know a lot of people are going to have problems with it. There's too much padding. I get it. There's too much of just, like, nonsensical or bullshit characters that they added. I get it. Everybody hates Chadley. I hate Chadley. But overall, being able to see all my favorite scenes from the original Final Fantasy VII handled so well and really bring those scenes to life, especially even characters like Kate Sith and stuff like that in Rebirth. Like in the original game, I didn't care about him at all, but the way that the voice acting brought him to life made him a very enjoyable character. And I just think that this series, like 7 Remake, Rebirth, are fantastic games. And I wouldn't say they're like the ideal way to experience 7 story, because for those of you who know, it's actually kind of like a sequel to the original Final Fantasy VII. But I would say like it's a fantastic game. And with that, even though it has flaws, like massive flaws, it is still God tier. So now that we've reached the end, is there anything that I want to adjust or change, kind of move something around? I know some people will say 6 deserves to be up there. I can see where you're coming from. I think 15 deserves to be up there, but it's just too flawed. Same with 8. I think 8 deserves to be up here. You could really argue any of the games in Almost Perfect to be in God tier, but I think the thing that kind of pushes them up to God tier for me is just, you know, the memories associated with it, the nostalgia, small details like, you know, the characters or the, you know, it could be the plot lines or side quests or those kinds of things. But I think overall, I'm happy with this. So there you have it, my Final Fantasy tier list. I'd love to know what your guys' top 3 Final Fantasies are down in the comments section below, so make sure to leave a comment down there. Once again, I want to thank every single person who's been watching these ranking videos. I really appreciate it, and I've gotten a much better response than I could have ever anticipated with these videos. There will be more ranking videos in the future, as well as vlogs and a bunch of other content, so make sure to subscribe for that. Hit that like button, it really helps me out, and I will see you guys all in the next video.